The second woe. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the horsemen was 200,000,000. And I heard the number of them, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. By these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Revelation 9, verses 13 to 21. Here we have a representation of something that came after the Saracenic affliction, but of as terrible a nature. The Saracens overran and subdued the eastern and southern provinces of the Roman Empire in 150 years, which are 5 months of years, viz., 5 times 30 equals 150. In another period of 150 years, their power had declined to the collapsing point. It took them 150 years to rise, and 150 years to fall, which was according to the 2 periods of 5 months mentioned in the prophecy of the 5th trumpet. But what further great oriental military eruption upon Europe is here represented in the 6th trumpet? The answer will naturally spring to everyone's lips, having the least acquaintance with history. It is suggested by the geography of the 6th trumpet just read. The river Euphrates is mentioned. This is the geographical basis of the symbolism, and takes our attention at once to the east. 4 angels bound within or on the eastern side of the Euphrates are summoned. Not literally 4 angels, of course, but military powers. That is shown by the fact that when they were loosed, in compliance with the command ordering them to be loosed, John saw not 4 angels, but myriads of horsemen. Our attention, fixed upon the east when the Saracenic torment had died away, beholds the Turkish hordes in muster, and sees them in 4 great waves pour into the provinces of the eastern third of the Roman Empire, spread over a period of nearly 400 years. It is needless to go into the particulars of these 4 military tornadoes that carried desolation and death into the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. They are associated with names famous in history: Togrul Beg, Alp Arslan, Timur or Tamerlane, Bajazet, and so on, the leaders of the Ottomans or Turkomans. The particulars may be found in Eureka at great length and clearness. It is sufficient for our purpose to see the general form of the fulfillment. The 4 angel powers did not come into operation simultaneously, but one after the other. Their mission was to slay the third part of men. The Saracens were not allowed to kill the Eastern Empire with political death, but only to subject it to scorpion torment. But the Turks were to slay. They were to prevail over and extinguish the eastern third of the Roman habitable, as the western had been by the Goths. To this end they were employed to deliver 4 successive assaults, so to speak, the last accomplishing the work for which the way had been paved by the work of the first 3. All 4 were necessary. The work to be done was therefore the mission of all, and for the performance of the work they were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year. This is symbolic time, which, reduced to literal time, gives the following result: an hour 1 month, a day 1 year, a month 30 years, a year 360 years, a total of 391 years 1 month. How do we apply this period to the work performed by the Turks against the Greek Empire, that is, the eastern third of the Roman Empire? This will be seen readily. As a matter of fact, the Turkish assault on the eastern remnant of the Roman Empire extended over nearly 400 years. Constantinople, with the capture of which the Roman Empire in the east was extinguished, fell into the hands of the Turks AD 1453. This was the accomplishment of the mission of the 4 angels. And if we reckon backwards 391 years, the time for which they were prepared, we find ourselves at the beginning of the Turkish power, when Togrul Beg, their first military leader, being married to the daughter of the Caliph of Baghdad, the head of the Saracenic or Mahometan religion, became head of the Mahometan faith, from whom the Turkish sultans have to this day inherited the title of Commander of the Faithful. This is sufficiently satisfactory illustration of the chronology of the otherwise obscure phrase, an hour and a day and a month and a year. It seems probable, however, that there is a secondary application of the period, according to the analogy of some other scriptural cases. That is, that it not only signifies the time that would be occupied from the commencement of the preparation of the 4 angels to the completion of their work, but also the time during which the work accomplished would last from the date of its accomplishment. It took 391 years from the time the Turkish power was fully organized to the extinction of the Eastern Roman third by its means, and it has taken a similar period to fulfill the course of the Turkish power from the time of its establishment to the time appointed for its drying up. If we add 391 years, the hour, day, month, and year, to the date of the capture of Constantinople, 1453, we are brought to the year 1844, when the Turkish Empire had fully entered on that downward course that at the present moment, 1880, threatens its total extinction. This would give twice 391 years for the full work of the 4 angels of the 6th trumpet, nearly 800 years. This is a long period compared with the time of the preceding trumpets, except the 5th, which occupied twice 5 months of years, or 300 years. The disparity may strike us at first sight as strange. We must remember, however, that a difference is marked between the first 4 and the last 3 trumpets, by the fact that when the first 4 had been blown, an angel bewailed the fate of mankind in prospect of the remaining 3. The protracted duration, as well as the severe nature of the woes of the remaining trumpets, would seem to be intimated by this preface. However this may be, the fifth and sixth trumpets bring their chronology with them. They contain specifications of duration for their events. There is no mention of time in any of the other trumpets, while in these two we have periods defined which harmonize with the historical facts of the case. The number of the cavalry will strike everyone as enormous. Verse 16, 200,000, 200 millions. Here there must be some exaggeration, surely, someone might say. Perhaps such an one may think another thought on the subject if he understands that what is meant is not the number employed at the commencement of the Turkish power, but the number spread over the entire course of the Turkish career. The number of horsemen used by the Turks, whose soldiers were nearly all horsemen, during 400 years would not be likely to run far short of the immense figures of the sixth trumpet. And if we add to them the horsemen used by them during their ascendancy in a second period of 400 years, the number ceases to have the impossible aspect it possesses at first sight. The description of the horsemen may also appear at first sight a difficulty. Breastplates of fire, jacinth and brimstone, heads of horses as the heads of lions, with fire, smoke, and brimstone issuing from their mouths, by which three things, the fire, the smoke, and the brimstone, the mission of the horsemen was accomplished, viz., the third part of men was killed, having also tails with heads in which their power lay, and with which they inflicted injury. All this is very hideous and appalling, if taken as a description of literal things. Doubtless the demonology of popular theology borrows some of its conceptions from this description. The pictures of hobgoblins and evil creatures with which the youthful fancies of the present generation were scared into piety have doubtless part of their roots in the dreadful imagery of the sixth trumpet and other parts of the Apocalypse. It is only an unenlightened treatment of the Apocalypse, however, that can yield such results. When the great fact is kept sight of that the Apocalypse is a condensed and symbolic exhibition of literal things, we escape the difficulties into which a literal reading inevitably leads, and are kept on the lookout for the meaning of the symbol, instead of being overpowered and bewildered by gazing on the symbol itself as a literal thing. There is only so much of the literal throughout as serves to give character and clue to the symbolism. Here we have horsemen and the Euphrates as literal elements in the imagery that at once identify the symbol with the Turkish apparition that scared and afflicted Europe over 7 centuries ago. The details of the picture exhibit other literal elements hieroglyphically. The whole Turkish career during centuries is condensed into one immense army of cavalry which John sees and hears enumerated. The means by which this army prevailed to the extinction of Eastern Rome are illustrated. Gunpowder. The Turks prevailed over the Romans by the use of gunpowder at a time when it had been recently invented. The Turks were the first to use cannon. It was by this they killed the third. Had their foes been similarly armed, their success, humanly speaking, would have been doubtful. Now the principal thing that would strike anyone witnessing an army of cavalry using field guns would be the 3 things mentioned by John: fire, smoke, and brimstone, and a description of the new weapons dragged after the horses at a time when they had no name would be a tail with a head to it, in which lay the power to hurt. These same tails would, however, when the artillery came into action, become the mouths of the formidable horsemen of the vision. For, of course, when the artillery vomited fire and smoke and brimstone, the horsemen would be in the rear of their pieces, which accounts for their power being said to be both in their mouths and in their tails. The roaring of the guns would also account for their mouths being said to be like lions' mouths, and their breastplates or protection behind which they would fight being of fire and brimstone. Even apart from these special explanations, which are doubtless the proper ones, the destructive power of the horsemen in relation to the third would be a sufficient justification of their highly wrought description after the analogy of Scripture example. See Habakkuk 1 verse 8, Joel 2 verses 4 to 8, Isaiah 5 verse 21 to 30, etc. The rest of the men, we are told, that were not killed by these plagues, repented not of the works of their hands, a statement illustrated by the fact that notwithstanding the terrible affliction and the overthrow of eastern Rome by the Turks as the instruments of God's vengeance, the populations of Western Europe continued addicted to the doctrines and practices of Mother Church, which God has stamped with his execration. The eastern section of Christendom was given over to the desolating Turk, because of its long-standing and patiently borne, but increasing abominations, after the example of the 7 nations of Canaan which, for a similar reason, were given over to the sword of Joshua. The eastern section of Christendom comprises all the countries that were anciently the scenes of divine visitation in a special manner. The Holy Land, where God wrought openly and the prophets delivered their messages, and Asia Minor, where the apostles laboured and the Spirit shone in the midst of the ecclesias in the miraculous endowments it conferred on leading brethren. Thus it comes to pass in our day, 1880, that all the lands of hallowed memory are blighted and desolate under Turkish rule. The horsemen of the 6th trumpet, summoned by the trumpet blast of divine providence, swept over the 3rd to its extermination and the consequent desolation of the lands over which they threw the blighting shadow of their subsequently established government. The 7th trumpet, however, will end this state of things. Though itself a trumpet for woe of mankind, its woes are of a healing order. For John heard an angel proclaim concerning the 7th trumpet, "In the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God shall be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets." What this mystery, or formerly hidden secret, is, those are aware who are acquainted with those writings of the prophets wherein it is declared. It is the recovery of his land from desolation, Isaiah 61 verse 4, the establishment therein of a divine government for all the world, Jeremiah 3 verse 17, and the consequent blessedness of all the nations of the earth walking in the light thereof, Micah 4 verses 1 to 4. This glorious mystery, for which there has been a preparation in all past ages, will be finished, accomplished, or established in the days of the voice of the 7th angel. Its accomplishment will be preceded by woes transcending all former human experiences, consequent on the fact that in the course of it, Jehovah, in the person of Christ, comes forth out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. Isaiah 26 verse 21. This causes the 7th trumpet to be classed with the woe trumpets, but in its ultimate effects it is only good. Its general character is proclaimed in the great voices in heaven, which John heard when the seventh angel sounded. Revelation 11, verse 15. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. The seventh trumpet changes the face of the world. It puts an end to human rule and establishes the kingdom of God in all the earth. This is a glorious change, but not to be effected without the putting forth of much destructive power, dashing the nations in pieces like a potter's vessel. Psalm 2, verse 8 and 9, Daniel 2, verse 44-45. And causing a time of trouble such as never has been. Daniel 12, verse 1. It might be supposed that the fifth and sixth trumpets, the Saracenic and Ottoman, having occupied such a long time, and the seventh being with them one of the three woe trumpets, it must be a long time yet before the saints attain that salvation which is to be brought to them under the seventh trumpet in the establishment of the kingdom of God. Any dreary conclusion of that sort is excluded by the 10th chapter of the Apocalypse, which comes within the lecture of this evening. The 9th chapter covers the entire period occupied by the rise and fall of the Saracens and Turks. The 10th chapter takes up the thread where Turkish history closes, and exhibits a symbol which shows that at that juncture the promised divine interposition, which overthrows the kingdoms of men, takes place. John sees, chapter 10, verse 1, a cloud-clothed angel descend from heaven with a face of sun-like brightness, and head encircled with rainbow-like beauty and glory. His feet like pillars of fire. He places one in the sea and one on the land, and utters a shout like a lion's roar. His shout is followed by 7 thunder peals, in which intelligent voices are audible, declaring certain matters which John wished to write, but was forbidden. The angel lifts his hand to heaven, and swears by him that liveth for ever and ever, that there should be time, delay, no longer. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God shall be finished. This declaration and symbol taken together show that the third woe, or 7th trumpet, is not to be protracted like the 1st and 2nd, or 5th and 6th trumpet. A conclusion further confirmed by the remark in Revelation 11, verse 14, The 2nd woe is past, and behold, the 3rd woe cometh quickly. It may be asked, how does the symbol support this conclusion? The answer is, it does so by its manifest identity with Christ and the saints in their corporate relation to the world in the day of their glory. The angel, of course, is a symbol standing for a class sent, for it is clothed in a cloud, the symbol of a multitude. It is a class exercising conquering power on sea and land, for the angel places his right foot on the sea and his left on the land. It is destructive power, for his feet are fiery. It is for beneficent purposes, however, for a rainbow encircling his head speaks of sunshine after rain. It is an effective class that can command the world's attention, for he cries with a voice that resembles a lion's roar. It is a voice controlling executive authority. For 7 thunders, the symbol of war, are let loose by its utterance. It is not a fallible human community, for the thunders so loosed divulge revelation. It is not an earthly or mortal class, for the face of the angel shines with the lustre of the sun. It does not originate among men, but is of divine origin, for the angel comes down from heaven. Now, when we ask what class, according to the plainer scriptures, appears upon the scene at the close of the Turkish desolation, with authority to proclaim the dispensation at an end, and the time arrived for the accomplishment of God's prophetically enunciated purpose in the earth, and to set warlike agencies in motion for the enforcement of their decree, there is but one answer. Jesus comes to be glorified in his saints, and admired in all them that believe. The 2nd of Thessalonians 1, verse 10. What is his promise to them at that time? To him will I give power over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron. As the vessels of a potter shall they be broken to shivers, even as I received of my Father. Revelation 2, verse 26. He and they, head and body, then form one powerful community, of whom it was testified in Daniel concerning this time. Judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Daniel 7, verse 22. Consequently, the mighty angel seen by John to descend from heaven at the close of the Turkish plague cannot be understood in any other light than as the symbol of the one body in its manifestation in power and great glory at the advent of Christ. This view enables us to understand why John was forbidden to record what the symbolic thunders proclaimed. What is recorded for the guidance of the servants of Christ during his absence. But at the time of the 7 thunders he will not be absent. He will be amongst them, and they will be gathered around him, and will themselves be the executioners of the 7th thunder, or nation-breaking program. The knowledge of what they will do then, in its details, would be of no special value to them now, when they are on probation for a place in the mighty angel community, while publication of those details in advance might interfere in some way with the execution of the divine work then, as regards the nations of the earth. As to the little book or scroll open in the angel's hand, there cannot be any difficulty in view of the fact that a closed or sealed book or scroll is always in scriptural usage the figure for that which is either not revealed or not understood. Isaiah 29, verse 11-12, Daniel 12, verse 4. An open book in the hand of the multitudinous angel manifestly tells us that in that day there will be no more concealing or non-perception of the divine counsel, but such an exhibition of the glory of the Lord, that all flesh, even the unwilling, Isaiah 26, verses 10-11, shall see it together, Isaiah 40, verse 5, and 66, verse 23, with the result that the veil shall be taken from the eyes of all nations, Isaiah 25, verse 7, and they shall confess, coming from the ends of the earth, they have been the victims of darkness and imposture, Jeremiah 16, verse 19. The incident of the eating of the book by John, verses 8-11, is confirmatory of this interpretation. John was commanded to go up to the angel holding the open book in his hand and take it. Having done so, he was commanded to eat it, which he did, a symbolic transaction, for men do not eat literal books. Men are said to eat words in the sense of receiving and embracing the instruction they afford. Jeremiah 15, verse 16, Psalm 119, verse 103. To eat a book is intellectually to appropriate its contents by reading. The eating of the open book in question by John shows that the angel was a symbol of the class to which John belonged. For whereas the book was first in the angel's hand, it was transferred from the angel to John, and thus an identity was established between them. What followed the eating is further instructive in the matter. John relished the act of eating, but the effects produced after the eating were disagreeable. This harmonizes with the fact that every saint, even now in measure, experiences, viz., that while the reception of Jehovah's truth is itself a source of pure sweetness and peace, it makes us the subject of great bitterness afterwards in the feelings with which we view the state of the world and the wickedness of man around us on every hand. John, having eaten the book, was told, "Thou must prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings." Verse 11. This shows that the book stood for divine knowledge, the eating for the act of acquiring that knowledge, and the purpose of its impartation, that it might be communicated to others. We may take this as affording a hint to ourselves even now, for John is our brother if we are brethren of Christ. But there can be no doubt that the ultimate significance of the book eating is of a future application, both as regards John and those for whom he stood. John was an old man when he was told he would have again to prophesy before the nations and kings. He was close on 100 years of age, and there is no evidence that he ever appeared in public after receiving the Apocalypse. His death occurred shortly afterwards. Consequently, the prophesying in question must refer to what he will have to do after his resurrection at the coming of Christ. This would follow from the conclusion that the angel out of whose hands he received the book was a symbol of the saints in their post-resurrectional relation to the nations. An open book in that angel's hands must stand for the things to be further revealed at the coming of Christ, the time having then arrived for the realization of Paul's words, "Now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Then shall we know, even as we are known." 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12. How interesting is the reflection that comes out in this interpretation of the case, viz., that John, and therefore his brethren, and therefore we, if we are acknowledged of the Lord as such in the day of his coming, will be mediums of communication between the Lord and the nations in the great epoch of the end, during the process by which the government of all the earth is transferred from its present holders to the King of kings and Lord of lords, who shall reign for ever. This means much interesting work and many sweet revenges in the day of Christ. The brethren of Christ are now despised with a fervid abhorrence. They are hated of the world because they are not of the world. They are looked upon as utter and irreclaimable rubbish, or as Paul expresses it, the offscouring of all things, and this is by no means agreeable to them. But how completely will the situation be changed when those brethren appear throughout the earth as the authorized messengers of Jesus returned. Doubtless at first they will be opposed and slighted, as Moses and Aaron were by Pharaoh. But how easily they will bear it with the knowledge that they are immortal, and that they have Christ behind them in an open and visible manner, and that the time has come for the overthrow of the power of the enemy and the triumph of Christ in all the earth.